Video, I'll be talking about the maintenance and testing and operation of the navigational equipment. This covers the bridge equipments in generic terms and talks about the specific bridge equipments operation, maintenance and testing. So the first thing I want to tell you guys is that if you're the navigation officer on bridge, you must be familiar with all the equipments that you have on the bridge. To do so, you must read the manuals, make sure you are very aware of where the manuals are. Even though you may have sailed on ships which carried similar equipment before, it's advisable for you to read the manuals and make yourselves aware of any specific requirements that a particular equipment may have. So although the equipment may look like the equipment you had on a previous ship, or it may be made by the same makers, it's always advisable to read the manuals and make yourselves very familiar, because on the bridge, when you are on the bridge, you are in charge of the navigational watch, and it's essential that you recognize the alarms, the faults, the various equipments that are there on the bridge, and there are many of them. All right. Make sure you are carrying out regular checks of each bridge equipment. So when you start taking over the navigation watch, make sure that you take a round of the bridge and you check each and every bridge equipment individually, making sure they are working. If they are not working, you should be notifying not only the officer on watch whom you are relieving, but also the master. Make sure that you note down any defects of the navigational equipment, and any defects, any malfunctioning should be reported to the master, no matter how big or small it is, no matter its time of the day or night. You must inform the master if you find anything that is not working on the bridge. Make sure that the planned maintenance routines, you adhere to them. So these days, of course, you have planned maintenance systems on board your ships, and the bridge equipments also fall under the planned maintenance system, which we also call as PMS. Now, under the PMS, there are scheduled checks for each and every bridge equipment. Some of them are daily checks, some of them are weekly checks, some of them are checks that need to be done at every watch, so on and so forth. So make sure you adhere to those requirements. Not only it's a company's requirement, but it's also an ISM requirement. You need to show documentation that you are carrying out these checks at the scheduled intervals. All right, so let's start talking about a general overview of the minimum bridge equipment requirements. So let's start with the radars and ARPAs. So if you don't know what ARPA is, I think you should be knowing, but ARPAs stand for Automatic Radar Plotting Aids, and they are, you know what they are. There's a picture here, so you can see what they are, and you must be sailing on ships if you're watching these videos, so I don't need to go into what radars are, right? So a minimum of at least one radar must be made available for the officer on watch when you are at sea. Some companies, when I was sailing, they used to ask the officer on watch to switch off the radars if it's open sea during the day and there is not traffic. Say if you're in the middle of the Indian Ocean or Pacific Ocean and it's a daytime, just post a lookout and do not switch on the radar. However, these days, most of the companies, they ask the officer to always keep a radar on, irrespective of the time of the day, and at least one of them should be on, a radar or ARPA. Radars must be switched on early. So like I said, they should always be switched on. So if you're departing port, you should switch them on and make sure you check that they are working. Because sometimes the visibility may be great, it may be daytime, maybe there's no ship around, no traffic around, and suddenly there might be an onset of a restricted visibility or fog or mist or sandstorms. And that point of time, you don't want to be switching on your radar and waiting for it to turn on, and say, for example, you find that it's not working, then you are in a fix. So always make sure your radars are switched on early and they are working, and you should check them before departure port. Radars must be readied before the onset of bad weather. I've covered that already, and it must be operational and closely monitored in poor visibility. Performance to be checked before sailing, I've mentioned that as well, and performance to be checked at least once every 4 hours. Why I said that is, like I said before, many ships or many companies want the officer to keep the radars off or the ARPAs off during the daytime if you're in the middle of the ocean and there's no traffic around. But even then, you should make sure you switch on the radar at least once and ensure that it's operational before you hand over your watch to the other officer. Make sure your radar is centered as per your requirements. So sometimes so the radars have different settings like north up, course up, or head up, and different officers are used to different kind of headings. So not here to recommend any type of heading here, but make sure that you are very aware of the settings of the radar and the bearings and the that you're obtaining of the ongoing or incoming vessels are the correct bearings, because if your radar is not centered properly, then the bearings will be miscalculated, and the risk of collision and the time to the closest point of approach or the closest point of approach, all these data will be miscalculated. So make sure you check for all these errors, or rather all these settings. With radar and ARPA, make sure radar positions are verified by other means. So try to use GPS as well. So don't only rely on radar ranges and bearings, but also try to use people are mostly using GPSs, but if you are doing coastal navigation, people sometimes try to use only range and bearing of fixed objects. Try to supplement it with not only the GPS, which everybody uses, but if possible, use celestial observations using the sextant and supplement the positions as well. Ensure that all the feeds into the radar that are coming in are operational. For example, if the speed and distance log, the gyro compass, the GPS is feeding into the radar, make sure that the data in all these equipments are synchronized, and the data that the individual equipment is showing, that is the same data that is being fed into the radar or ARPA. Even the collision regulations, Rule 7b, dictate that proper use shall be made of the radar equipment if fitted and operational, including long-range scanning to obtain early warning of risk of collision, and radar plotting or equivalent systematic observation of detected objects. When it comes to steering gear and track controls, the officer on watch should ensure that all testing and checks are done in accordance with SOLAS chapter 5. So there are certain checks that need to be done with the steering gear. There are about 12 or 13 points that are mentioned in SOLAS chapter 5, and make sure you go through these points and make yourselves aware of the various checks that you are supposed to be carrying out when departing port. This is for steering gear. All methods of changeover must be displayed prominently. So changing over procedure from manual to auto and vice versa, or from manual to emergency steering gear, must be displayed next to the steering panel. Adjust the off-course alarm to correspond to the prevailing weather conditions. So make sure that the off-course alarm on your steering gear corresponds to the prevailing weather conditions. What that means is, if the ship is into heavy weather and the ship is rolling and pitching and yawing, the off-course alarm may be triggered off more frequently, because that off-course alarm is set for when the vessel is proceeding smoothly at sea without any other movements, any accelerations. So make sure you adjust the off-course alarms, otherwise the alarm will keep on getting triggered, and that distracts you from keeping watch on the bridge. And ensure, of course, all the alarm systems are checked frequently. So the steering gear panel will also have different alarm systems. One could be for power failure, low level alarm, off-course alarm, and then weather alarm, radar control, rudder alarms. So there are many alarms that are there in steering gear control panel. Make sure you check them, and that the settings are as per the requirements of the master or you as the officer on watch. When it comes to gyro and magnetic compasses, make sure that gyro compass is running continuously. Gyro compasses need to be run continuously, because these days, of course, you have fiber optic gyros that if you switch on the fiber optic gyros, they quickly align with the true north within half an hour or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Now in the olden days, and maybe some of you are still sailing on those kind of ships, where the gyros needed to, the gyro motor needed to gain, or rather acquire, a particular momentum, which was about 36,000 RPM or something like that. That took a long time. So unless and until it gained that momentum, the gyro used to be a bit wandering. So the true north, it could not seek the true north, and so the gyro could not be used for course keeping or bearings or direction seeking. And that is why it was advisable that the gyro compasses should not be switched off, and if they are switched off, then you must switch it on at least 4 to 5 hours before departure of the ship from the port or from the dry dock, so that the gyro could take those 4 or 5 hours, the gyro motor could get that momentum, and then it could seek the north element, so that the gyro compass could be steadied and used for course measurement or steering purposes. Some gyro compasses require latitude and speed corrections. Many of the modern day gyro compasses actually don't, but if they do, and if you're sailing on one of those ships, then make sure that you apply those latitude and speed corrections. So with increasing speed and different latitudes, the accelerations that a ship faces and the gyro master gyro experiences keep on changing, so you need to apply those settings. Now that's the tough part here, because these days there are so many kinds of gyros. The modern day ships, of course, they all have fiber optic gyros, which work on a fantastic principle of optics. They are much improved, much faster, more accurate. But there are also ships at sea that are operating on the old gyro. So I pretty much try to cover both the aspects. Otherwise, I'm just giving you one side of the picture, and you might be sailing on ships with other kind of gyros. That's why I try to keep the old as well as the new, because there are some ships still that are running on the old system here. However, make sure that you check your master gyro with the gyro repeaters and synchronize them at least once per watch, if not more. So the master gyro is the main gyro, and then you have about 2 to 3 gyro repeaters, one in the center and one on the port side, one on the starboard side, normally on merchant fish vessels. So make sure they're all synchronized and showing the same course so that you can use it for bearing purposes. And check the gyro alarm daily. So the gyro, master gyro will also have its own sets of alarms. Some of it could be for low level, it could be for off course, it could be for speed and latitude corrections or accelerations or something like that. So make sure that you adjust the alarm and check the settings of the alarm as per the manufacturer's instructions. When it comes to gyro and magnetic compasses, make sure that you also compare the gyro and magnetic compass frequently. So the gyro compass is your steering compass on most of the ships. That's the autopilot compass, because it seeks north true, or sorry, rather the true north, and you can use it as a reference point for course measurement and steering purposes. But right above your steering panel, you have the magnetic compass, and you can see the magnetic compass at all times. So make sure you always compare those compasses and write it in the logbook that compasses were compared and courses were checked, and you should do that frequently to make sure there is the gyro, in case the gyro starts to fail, then you can steer the ship by the magnetic compass. Establish and record the gyro errors as well as the magnetic compass errors at least once per watch. So the calculation of the deviation also falls in this category. Make sure you note these down, and if you are unable to do so, you must mention in the compass error book or the logbook that why you were unable to do so. So some of the valid reasons could be that there was too much traffic, and the safety of the ship and cargo and people were of course your priority, or the weather was very bad, or it was very cloudy skies and you could not see any of the celestial bodies to get a compass error. Make sure the compass binnacles are clean, the gyro compass binnacles especially. The magnetic compass binnacles, they are normally covered all the time, but it's a good idea to every now and then open those covers, the canvas covers, and check that the magnetic compass is in good condition. You must check the magnetic compass bowl weekly for bubbles. So the magnetic compass which is there on the Monkey Island, on the topmost deck of the accommodation, make sure that you check that there are no bubbles in there, otherwise you can extract the bubbles. There are also spare magnetic compass bowls available on the bridge. Make sure you check for those bubbles in those spare parts as well. When it comes to chronometers, now if you don't know what a chronometer looks like, this is like a more sophisticated version. This is actually a Swiss watch, it's not a chronometer. Chronometer pretty much looks like this because it's an analog watch. It's like a clock, but it's kept in a sealed compartment, and that chronometer provides you with the GMT time at all times. Alright, so but you need to compare the chronometers with the time signal that you get through the radio to ensure that there is no error in the chronometer, and the chronometer is displaying the exact GMT time. This normally is done by getting the radio signal of the BBC channel, and every hour they give the hour, they sound the hour, and you can at that point of time match the time that it sounds on the radio with the time that the chronometer is showing. Anyhow, many chronometers are manual. Some chronometers are manual that need to be wound daily, and some of them are of course battery operated. Now modern day chronometers, most of them are all battery operated, so you need to make sure that the batteries, when they run out, you need to replace the batteries. You must check the time every day, and you will know that when the clock stops to work, you must change the batteries. If they are manually operated, they require to be wound every day, sometimes twice a day, depends on the make and model, and you need to do that as well. Check the time signal daily. I just explained the process of checking the time signal. Like I told you, normally an officer is designated to do that, and they obtain the radio time signal of the BBC especially, because they pretty much sound the time at the GMT every hour of the clock, and you can compare that time with the time shown on the chronometer. If there is any kind of discrepancy, then you can adjust the chronometer. Don't allow the chronometer error to be more than few seconds, and you need to log this down in the chronometer logbook daily and get it signed by the master. When it comes to echo sounders, make use of the information regularly. Now what do I mean by this is that many ships officers, when the ship is approaching port or departing port, or the pilotage is very long, they try to switch off the echo sounder and try to save the paper or try to save it from running. Of course, I'm not saying people do that, but I've seen people do that, and that's why I'm letting you know. But don't do that, because these are records of voyages. So if you are in a long pilotage, some pilotages are sometimes 3 to 4 hours, and if you're in a long pilotage and something goes wrong, you need to show evidence of prudent seamanship. So that means that you need to show evidence to the investigators that you were monitoring the echo sounder, you were recording the depths, and if after that something goes wrong, then of course you can always justify that you were taking all precautions, and if something went wrong, that was out of your hands, or nothing to be blamed. So you need to switch it on in ample time, especially port approaches. So you don't have to keep it on at sea, unless of course at sea you will be transiting areas that you suspect have low depth of water. Otherwise, normally echo sounders are used when you are approaching or departing port, and you record the depths, and this becomes a proof of voyage. This is essential evidence. So you should be marking the echo sounders with the voyage number, the date, and any other details that helps you to identify the data, because the echo sounder has a large roll of paper, and that runs for about a couple of months, 3 months, depends on how much you use it. So if you just run it but you don't mark it, and if the port state officer or the flag state officer comes on board, or investigators come on board during an accident investigation, and they ask you to reproduce the evidence of echo sounder, you should be able to show the exact evidence and not just the roll of paper which is not marked with any dates or voyage numbers. All right. If you need to mark and record any salient features, like if you have passed an area where you were not expecting a shallow depth but it suddenly showed up, you can mark that. If you see a wreck, you can mark that, or any other during the pilotage you want to mark areas, you can do that on the echo sounder by pressing the marker button. Make sure that you run it at various range scales regularly, because sometimes in shallow depths you cannot have large ranges selected. You should have shallow ranges selected. It gives you more accuracy, and vice versa. Of course, that if you are in high depths of water, you cannot run it on shallow depths. When it comes to speed and distance recorders, that are logs, ship's logs, the logs can be electromagnetic logs or Doppler logs. I have made videos on that and put up on my channel, so make sure you watch that. Log distances should be recorded at the end of each watch. Many companies, they don't do it, they follow the GPS. But many companies, and it depends on the master's requirements as well, they make comparisons with the GPS, with the ship's log. So make sure that if such requirements are there in your company, you should be writing down the log distances or distances to go at the end of each watch. Make sure that you record these log readings at every alter course positions or changes in speed, etc. So any other situations. So for example, if the speed was reduced, or if the engines broke down and after that the ship resumed voyage, or if there were any alterations of courses, or any scheduled or unscheduled alteration of courses, you should be logging down all these details. The log readings may also be inserted on the chart, just like many officers insert the GPS readings for distances to go. You may insert the log readings as well. When it comes to electronic position fixing aids, we are mainly talking about the GPS. So make sure that along with the GPS, you may use an alternative method. So that could be a separate GPS, it could be radar ranges and bearings, it could be celestial observations, it could be coastal bearings, transit bearings. So make sure that you don't only rely on GPS for position fixing. GPS, of course, these days GPSs are very accurate. But remember, everything is man-made. The signals they operate from the satellites is man-made. Everything is man-made, and so anything can go wrong. At the end of the day, they are electronic equipments, and you cannot fully guarantee its accuracy. So make sure that you don't only rely on GPS for position fixing, but you also use all the other supplementary position fixing methods, and develop this habit at an early stage of your career. So when you become masters, you don't rely only on one kind of position fixing system, because you need to ensure that your ship is always safe. You become responsible for the lives of all your crew. So make sure that you do that. Apply the corrections that you see on your charts. So some GPSs need some additional corrections. WGS datum, it's called, on the charts it mentioned. So you need to be aware of the areas you are transiting, and if there are any corrections that need to be applied in that area, be aware of those corrections and apply it. Navigation lights and signals. Make sure the navigational lights and signals all are working. I have covered these lights and signaling devices in a separate video. Please go to my channel and watch those videos, and that will give you a knowledge about what navigation lights I'm talking about and what are the signaling devices on the ship. So in short, just make sure that all these devices, you have a number of devices on the ship, make sure all of them are working. You know where they are. Many a times the port state or the flag state officer comes on board the ship and they ask you to show this equipment and show the condition of the equipment. So even though you may not have used the equipment for a long time, or you may have joined the vessel and during your short stay you have not used it, make sure at least you know where the equipment is, in what condition it is. If there is something wrong with it, the defects should be noted down, master should be informed, and you must also inform the company to replace that equipment or rectify it. At all times, these equipment should be ready and locatable. Check conditions of the flags and the shapes as well. Many a times, because flags and shapes are not frequently used, people just store it away in boxes and they forget about it, and then wear and tear happens, or they are exposed to weather, or they are just dumped under a lot of other equipments and they get spoiled and unusable. Make sure that is not the case on your ship. Sound signaling apparatus such as whistles, gongs, bells, and auto fog signals, all these should be tested. Some officers check it every noon. They just sound the whistle with a short blast at noon, and otherwise just test it during the watch. Try to do it during the daytime, because at night people are sleeping. But make sure all this equipment, you know the location and that they are working. Alright, so I hope that this video informed you on the maintenance procedures and the operating procedures and the testing procedures for the bridge equipment. I'll see you soon with our next video. I always look forward to receiving feedback from you, and thank you to all my subscribers and people who watch these videos. I request you to subscribe, because then you'll be aware of the new videos that I'll be putting in. Thanks guys.